The rope swayed in the desert wind like a serpent waiting to strike. Clara Morningstar stood beneath it, her hands bound behind her back, chin raised in defiance despite the fear coursing through her veins. The crowd of Willowbrook's finest. Citizens had gathered in the town square, their faces twisted with righteous anger and something darker, the kind of hatred that had been festering in their hearts since the Apache raids had begun. Sheriff Tom Bradley adjusted his hat and cleared his throat. Clara Morningstar, you stand accused of aiding and abetting Apache raiders in their attacks on this town. You've been found guilty by a jury of your peers, and the sentence is death by hanging. The word peers tasted bitter in Clara's mouth. These people had never been her peers. Half Apache, half white, she belonged to neither world fully, and both had rejected her in their own ways. Her mother's people saw her as tainted by white blood. The white settlers saw her as nothing more than a savage, despite her father being one of their own. "Any last words?" Bradley asked, though his tone suggested he didn't much care what she had to say. Clara lifted her head higher. "I am innocent of the crimes you accuse me of. But I know my words mean nothing to you. You've already decided what you believe." Murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Apache witch." Another voice called out, "Should have done this years ago." Clara closed her eyes and thought of her mother, White Dove, who had died when Clara was just 16. She thought of the small cabin on the outskirts of town where she'd tried to live quietly, tending her garden and selling herbs to the few townspeople brave enough to buy from her. She thought of the children she'd helped deliver, the fevers she'd broken with her remedies, the wounded she'd nursed back to health. Most of all, she thought of Jacob Hartwell, with his gentle blue eyes and calloused hands. The rancher who had loved her despite everything, who had proposed to her under a canopy of stars 3 years ago, the man she'd had to push away when the raids began, knowing that loving her would only bring him danger. The crowd grew restless. Bradley motioned to his deputy, began positioning the noose. That's when the sound of thundering hooves cut through the morning air. A lone rider crested the hill at the edge of town, his horse kicking up clouds of dust as he rode hard toward the square. Even from a distance, Clara recognized the way he sat in the saddle, the determined set of his shoulders. Jacob. The crowd turned as one to watch him approach. Jacob Hartwell was well known in these parts, a successful rancher who'd built his spread from nothing, a man whose word carried weight. But as he drew closer, Clara could see something in his face she'd never seen before, a cold fury that made her blood run chill. He pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the crowd, dismounted, and walked straight through the gathered people, as if they were nothing more than tumbleweeds in his path. "Hold up there, Bradley," Jacob called out, his voice carrying across the square with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "Sheriff," Bradley's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "This ain't your concern, Hartwell. The law's been followed here, has it?" Jacob stepped into the circle around the gallows, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. She saw something there that made her heart leap and break at the same time. Love, yes, but also a terrible desperation. "I said this ain't your concern," Bradley repeated. But his voice had lost some of its conviction. Jacob finally looked at the sheriff, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You're about to hang an innocent woman." "I'd say that makes it everyone's concern. She's Apache," someone in the crowd shouted. "She's been helping them raiders, has she?" Jacob turned to face the crowd. "Or is that just what you want to believe? Have any of you actually seen Clara Morningstar with these raiders? Has anyone here witnessed her passing information or supplies to them?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Murmurs rose and fell like wind through wheat. Jacob pressed on. "I know most of you folks. Jim Peterson, Clara delivered your youngest when the dock was stuck in a blizzard 20 miles out. Sarah Williams, she sat with your husband when he had the fever last spring. Wouldn't take a penny for her troubles. Tom Bradley," he turned back to the sheriff. "She saved your deputy's life when he took that arrow in the shoulder." "That don't mean nothing," Bradley said, but his voice had grown uncertain. "Doesn't it?" Jacob stepped closer to Clara, and she could smell the familiar scent of leather and sage that always clung to him. "Or maybe you're all just looking for someone to blame for your troubles. Someone who's different enough to make an easy target." Clara found her voice at last. Jacob, don't do this. They'll turn on you too. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw 3 years of longing and regret in his eyes. I should have done this a long time ago, he said quietly. I should never have let you face this alone. The crowd was growing agitated. Someone called out, "You're defending a savage, Hartwell." Jacob spun around, his hand dropping to his gun. The next person who uses that word is going to answer to me personally. The silence that followed was deafening. Sheriff Bradley cleared his throat. Look, Jacob, I understand you've got feelings for this woman, but the facts are the facts. She's been seen by who? Jacob demanded. Who's seen her? Where's your witness? Bradley hesitated. Well, there's been talk. Jacob's voice was flat with disgust. You're going to hang a woman based on talk? There's more to it than that. A new voice said from the crowd. Dr. Edmund Carruthers stepped forward, his expensive suit and carefully waxed mustache marking him as one of the town's more prominent citizens. Miss Morningstar has been observed leaving town at odd hours, riding toward Apache territory. Claire's heart sank. It was true she had been riding toward Apache land, but not for the reasons they thought. Jacob looked at her questioningly, and she saw the moment doubt crept into his eyes. The pain of it nearly brought her to her knees. Is that true, Clara? He asked quietly. She met his gaze steadily. Yes, the crowd erupted in angry shouts. Someone yelled, There's your proof. Another voice called out, String her up. But Jacob held up his hand, and something in his manner made them quiet down. Why? He asked Clara. Why were you riding toward Apache territory? Clara looked around at the hostile faces surrounding her. These people had made up their minds long ago. But Jacob was still asking questions. Even now, even after her admission, he was still trying to understand. I can't tell you, she whispered. The doubt in his eyes deepened, and Clara felt her heart breaking all over again. This was why she'd pushed him away 3 years ago. This was why she'd refused his proposal, why she'd told him they could never be together. She'd known this day would come, the day when loving her would force him to choose between her and everything else he'd built. Can't or won't? Jacob asked. Does it matter? She looked down at her bound hands. They've already decided what they believe. Dr. Carruthers stepped forward again. Sheriff Bradley, I think we've heard enough. The woman has admitted to consorting with the enemy. The law is clear. Bradley nodded reluctantly and signaled to his deputy. I'm sorry, Jacob, but wait. Jacob's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. If you're going to do this, then you're going to have to go through me first. He stepped directly in front of Clara, putting his body between her and the noose. The crowd gasped. Jacob, no, Clara whispered. Please don't do this. They'll what? He didn't turn around, but she could hear the smile in his voice. Hang me too? Let them try? Sheriff Bradley drew his gun. Step aside, Hartwell. Don't make me do something we'll both regret. The only thing I regret, Jacob said quietly, is not doing this sooner. He turned to face Clara then, and she saw that all the doubt had vanished from his eyes. In its place was something that took her breath away complete. Unwavering faith. I don't know why you were riding toward Apache territory, he said loud. Enough for the whole crowd to hear. But I know you. I know your heart. And I know you would never do anything to hurt innocent people. Tears started down Clara's cheeks. Jacob, I love you, he said simply. I've loved you since the day we met, and I'll love you until the day I die. If that's today, then so be it. The crowd was murmuring now, some angry, some confused. Dr. Carruthers looked frustrated. This is highly irregular, Sheriff. The man is clearly blinded by his feelings. Maybe so, Bradley said, but he's also got a point about evidence. We really have his talk and the fact that she was seen riding in a certain direction. That's enough for me, someone shouted from the crowd. And me? Another voice agreed. But other voices were beginning to speak up now. Hold on, called out Jim Peterson, the man Jacob had mentioned earlier. Clara did deliver my boy. Sat with my wife all night when things got complicated. She helped my Tom too. Sarah Williams added reluctantly. Wouldn't take nothing for it neither. The crowd was beginning to divide, and Clara could feel the shift in the air, like the change in wind before a storm. Some were still calling for her death, but others were looking uncertain now, remembering kindnesses she'd shown them over the years. Dr. Carruthers must have sensed it too, because his voice grew sharper. Sentiment aside, the woman is still half Apache. Her loyalty will always be divided. Is that so? Jacob turned to face the doctor, and there was something dangerous in his eyes now. Tell me, Carruthers, where were you born? The doctor looked taken aback. What does that have to do with anything? Answer the question. Philadelphia. If you must know, and yet here you are in Colorado territory making decisions about who belongs and who doesn't. Seems to me your loyalty might be divided to between here and back east. A few people in the crowd chuckled, and Dr. Carruthers's face reddened. That's hardly the same thing, isn't it? Jacob looked around at the gathered townspeople. How many of you were born right here in Willowbrook? How many of you came from somewhere else, looking for a new start, a new life? The crowd shifted, uncomfortably. Most of them were transplants, drawn west by the promise of land and opportunity. Clara was born 20 miles from here, Jacob continued. This is her home just as much as it's yours. More than some of yours, I'd wager. Clara watched in amazement as the crowd's mood continued to shift. Some were still hostile, but others were nodding now, looking ashamed. But she knew it wouldn't be enough, not unless she told them the truth. Jacob, she said quietly. He turned to her, and she saw the question in his eyes. I need to tell you something, she said. All of you. What? The reason I was riding toward Apache territory. The crowd quieted, leaning forward to hear. Clara took a deep breath. My half-brother lives with the Apache. Running Wolfies, my mother's son from her first marriage. When the raid started, I was trying to convince him to stop. The silence that followed was complete. I've been meeting with him, trying to talk sense into him, trying to make him see that innocent people were getting hurt. That's why I was riding toward Apache land, not to help the raiders to stop them. Dr. Carruthers recovered first. Even if that's true, how do we know you weren't passing information? To them? How do we know? Because Clara interrupted. Running Wolf is dead. The words hung in the air like smoke. He was killed 2 weeks ago by his own people for refusing to continue the raids. They found out about our meetings. About what I was trying to do. They called him a traitor. Her voice broke. He died because of me, because I convinced him to try to make peace. Jacob closed his eyes, and Clara saw him sway slightly as the full weight of her words hit him. When he opened his eyes again, they were bright with tears. Clara, he whispered. I couldn't tell anyone, she continued, looking around at the crowd. I couldn't prove he was dead without putting myself in danger. And I thought maybe the raids would stop now and no one would ever have to know. But they didn't stop, Sheriff Bradley said quietly. No. Clara's voice was barely audible. There are others. Running Wolf wasn't the only one leading raids. Now they're angrier than ever because they think the whites killed him. The crowd was completely silent now, absorbing this new information. Dr. Carruthers made one last attempt. This could all be a fabrication, a story designed to save her neck. But his words carried no weight now, and everyone could hear it. The crowd was turning away from him, looking at Clara with new eyes. Jacob stepped closer to her. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. When I proposed 3 years ago, why didn't you explain? Clara met his gaze. Because I knew this day would come. I knew that someday loving me would put you in danger, I thought. I thought if I pushed you away, you'd be safe. Safe, Jacob laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you have any idea what these past 3 years have been like? Watching you from a distance, knowing you were in trouble, knowing you wouldn't let me help. I was trying to protect you. Don't want your protection, he said fiercely. I want your trust. I want your love. I want your problems and your pain and your secrets. I want all of it, Clara, the good and the bad. Sheriff Bradley cleared his throat. Well, he said slowly, this certainly changes things. The crowd was dispersing now, people walking away in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. The bloodlust that had driven them here was fading, replaced by uncertainty, and for some, shame. Dr. Carruthers made one final attempt to rally them. Regardless of her story, she's still Apache. She's still the woman I love, Jacob said firmly. And if that's a problem for anyone here, they can take it up with me directly. No one took him up on the offer. Bradley holstered his gun and nodded to his deputy, who began untying Clara's hands. I reckon there's been enough excitement for one day, he said. Miss Morningstar, you're free to go. But I'd appreciate it if you'd keep yourself available in case we need to ask you any more questions. Clara rubbed her wrists where the ropes had chafed them. Of course, Sheriff. The crowd was almost completely dispersed now, leaving just Clara, Jacob, and a few stragglers. Dr. Carruthers had vanished, apparently unwilling to face the collapse of his case. Jacob stepped closer to Clara, his hands hovering near her arms as if he wanted to touch her, but wasn't sure he had the right. Are you hurt? He asked. She shook her head. No, just ... tired. Clara. His voice was rough with emotion. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. If I hadn't been out checking the north pasture, if I'd been in town when they arrested... It's not your fault, isn't it? He ran a hand through his hair. I should have fought harder 3 years ago. When you said we couldn't be together, I should have demanded to know why. You should have respected my decision, Clara said quietly. Which you did. My respecting your decision nearly got you killed today. They stood there, in the dusty town square, 3 feet of space between them that might as well have been 3 miles. Around them, Willowbrook was returning to its normal rhythms, storekeepers opening their doors, children running through the streets, life moving on as if nothing had happened. What happens now? Clara asked. Jacob looked at her for a long moment. That depends on you, on me. 3 years ago you said we couldn't be together. You said it was impossible. Is it still impossible, Clara? She thought about running Wolf, about the guilt she carried for his death. She thought about the raiders who were still out there, still angry, still dangerous. She thought about the townspeople who might accept her for now, but would always see her as different, as other. But she also thought about the way Jacob had stepped in front of the noose without hesitation, the way he defended her, even when she couldn't defend herself, the way he'd looked at her with absolute faith, even when the evidence seemed to be against her. I don't know, she said honestly. There are still so many complications. The raids haven't stopped. People will still talk. Your ranch, your reputation, let them talk, Jacob said. As for my ranch and my reputation, they don't mean a damn thing without you. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. Not asking for easy, Clara. I know it won't be easy. I'm just asking for a chance. She looked into his face, this good, stubborn, loyal man who had just risked everything for her, and felt something inside. Her chest unfurled like a flower opening to the sun. A chance, she repeated. That's all, just a chance to try. Clara thought about her mother, White Dove, who had loved a white man against all odds and social conventions, who had been happy, truly happy, for the brief time they'd been together before illness took her. My mother used to say, Clara said slowly, that love was like water in the desert. Even if you only get a little, even if it doesn't last long, it's worth everything. Jacob's face broke into the first real smile she'd seen from him in 3 years. Your mother was a smart woman. She was. Clara took a step closer to him. She also said that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be happy. Clara. Her name was a prayer on his lips. I've been so afraid, she whispered. So afraid of what might happen, of who might get hurt, forgot about what might go right. Jacob reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. What might go right, he asked. We might be happy, she said. We might have a good life together. We might prove that love is stronger than fear. We might, he agreed. And then he was kissing her. There in the dusty town square with the morning sun beating down on them and the gallows casting shadows at their feet. It was a kiss full of 3 years of longing, of relief, of promises for the future. When they finally broke apart, Clara rested her forehead against his. "There's still so much we need to figure out," she said. "The raids, the townspeople's reaction. Where we'll live, we'll figure it out," Jacob said firmly. "Together, whatever comes, we'll face it together." Clara looked around the square one more time. Most of the crowd had dispersed, but she could see curtains twitching in windows, faces peering out to watch. The story of what had happened here today would spread quickly. There would be consequences to face. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't facing them alone. "Together," she agreed. Jacob smiled and took her hand. "Come on, let's go home." "Where's home?" she asked. "Wherever you are," he said, simply, as they walked across the square toward Jacob's horse. Clara caught sight of Sheriff Bradley standing in the doorway of his office. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been respect or apology or simply acknowledgement. Dr. Carruthers was nowhere to be seen, but Sarah Williams stepped out of the Genera L store as they passed, and after a moment's hesitation, she nodded to Clara. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did for my Tom." It was a small thing, but Clara felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for more than just her and Jacob. Maybe there was hope for understanding, for acceptance, for something like peace. Jacob helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her as they rode out of town toward his ranch. Clara leaned back against his chest and allowed herself to imagine a future she'd never dared dream of before. A home where she belonged. A man who loved her not despite who she was, but because of it. Children who would grow up knowing they were wanted, would never have to choose between the different parts of their heritage. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges ahead, the ongoing threat of the raiders, the suspicion of some townspeople, the simple difficulties of building a life together in a harsh land. But as Jacob's arms tightened around her, and the Colorado sky stretched endlessly blue above them, Clara found herself believing in possibilities again. Behind them, Willowbrook grew smaller and smaller until it was just a smudge on the horizon. Ahead lay the future uncertain, but no longer faced alone. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and the promise of rain. And in that moment, Clara, Morningstar, finally understood what her mother had meant about love being like water in the desert. Sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, you got more than just a little. Sometimes you got enough to last a lifetime. Epilogue 1 year later. Clara Hartwell stood in the doorway of the ranch house she now called home, watching her husband break in a new horse in the corral. The simple gold band on her finger caught the afternoon light. She smiled at the sight of it. Their wedding had been small, just Sheriff Bradley to perform the ceremony, Sarah Williams and her husband as witnesses, and a handful of other townspeople who would slowly come to accept, if not fully embrace, the union. The raids had ended 6 months ago, when the last of the Apache war parties had finally moved deeper into the mountains, seeking territory less fraught with conflict. Clara's information about Running Wolf and the internal divisions among the raiders had proved valuable to the territorial government, earning her a grudging respect from officials in Denver. Dr. Carruthers had left town 3 months after the near hanging, citing opportunities in California. No one had been sorry to see him go. The morning sickness that had been plaguing Clara for the past few weeks chose that moment to assert itself, and she pressed a hand to her stomach, breathing deeply until the wave of nausea passed. Jacob looked up from the corral as if he'd sensed her distress, his eyes immediately concerned. She smiled and waved to let him know she was all right, then went back into the house to start dinner. Tonight, she decided, she would tell him about the baby. She'd been waiting for the right moment. But as she looked around the home they'd built together, the sturdy furniture Jacob had crafted with his own hands, the garden she'd planted behind the house, the bookshelves filled with volumes they'd read to each other in the evenings, she realized there was no such thing as a perfect moment. There was only love and trust, the courage to keep choosing each other every single day as the sun set over the Colorado mountains. Painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clara Hartwell began humming a song her mother used to sing, a lullaby in the Apache tongue about stars watching over sleeping children. Soon, she thought, there would be a new little one to sing to. Outside, she could hear Jacob putting the horses away for the night. A few minutes, he would come through that door, hang his hat on the peg by the entrance, and kiss her hello as he did every evening. It was a simple life, but it was theirs. And after everything they'd been through to get here, simple felt like a miracle. The desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the promise of another day, another chance to choose love over fear. And in the little ranch house, where an Apache woman and a white rancher had dared to build a life together, that promise felt like enough to last forever.